And Lee Lightfoot has done that on one issue close to her heart, economic inequity. Has she? It's time for her to show similar resolve. He goes on to talk about crime. And he talked about this, what he termed a gathering of young people that turned violent. That's how he characterized the beating that was inflicted on that CTA bus driver. So I took that phrase, a gathering of young people turned violent, and I tweeted out, harsh, next time go with honor students, Greg Hinz. And I continued, the Dem Socialist Comm Shop, a.k.a. the Chicago Political Press Corps, rivals the Babylon Bee when they stage pillow fights with their identitarian peeps. Okay, pretty straightforward. Yeah. And then Hinz responded, young people do have a right to gather, Dan, whether you like their skin color or not. Ooh. They don't have a right to break laws. And then we went on to have an exchange from there. I didn't mention their skin color, but Greg Hinz immediately went to skin color and essentially accused me of being a racist. I don't think that black kids have a right to gather. That's what he's saying.
And you didn't say that.
I did not. So I told Greg on Twitter I would invite him on the show. I did invite him on the show. To his credit, he accepted the invitation because I, for one, would like to find out how and why I'm a racist. And what Lori Lightfoot class I should attend to disabuse myself of my, I guess, implicit bias, to use the phrase. Greg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan.
So I'm a racist.
I didn't use that word, Dan.
You said I don't like kids gathering because of young people have a right to gather, Dan, whether you like their skin color or not. You're assuming you're saying I don't like black people because of their skin color. That's what you said.
Well, what were you saying, Dan? I mean, you clearly suggested that this group shouldn't have been allowed to assemble, and it was wrong for me to suggest that they did have, as long as they followed the law, a right to get together. What were you saying?
Well, I'm glad you asked. She probably should have asked that before you accused me of being a racist. A gathering of young people turned violent. That is sort of, and thus my reference sarcastically to calling them honor students. That is euphemistic, mealy-mouthed language. Yes, there are young people who gather, and that's fine. And then there are young people that gather for the purpose of violence. In other words, we have, and we've seen this over and over again in the city, there are young people and not so young people who have malice in their heart, who are there to commit crimes, who are there to cause mayhem. Not everyone who gathers, but there are some. And to cheapen this, like everybody was there to have a picnic, and then somehow it turned violent through no fault of anybody's. No, there was some segment of people there that were looking for trouble, and unfortunately that CTA bus driver found it. And of course,
great.
there are myriad other examples of that.
Trouble.
And there are myriad examples of that.
So great, go after the people that caused the trouble and arrest them. I thought, and I wrote that what happened to that CTA bus driver and the related attacks in downtown were terrible.
Right.
So go after the bad people.
Well, yes, I know, but you're characterizing all the people as a young group that turned violent. I'm suggesting it's not a young group that turned violent. There were people there that had violence on their minds, and they committed acts of violence, and you sanitize it, not me. I'm all for going for people commit crimes and separating and distincting and making distinctions between the two.
Were you down there? Were you down there, Dan? Did you talk to the people?
No, I did not.
Were you?
I wasn't there either, but I did talk to people in the police department who tell me that, for the most part, these were kids just looking for a party. It was a gathering, and that some evil-minded folks took advantage of the situation to cause trouble.
Right.
And that's what I was referencing.
And so the
people, instances, the police absolutely did what they should do, and the people that did try to cause the trouble shouldn't have.
Right. So there are people, and it's a small segment of the Chicago population. There are people that are intent on causing trouble, and that's how it should be characterized. A youthful gathering. The characterization is there were people that attacked this bus driver. Forget the youthful gathering of other people that are ancillary to the story. The only thing that's relevant to the story is
it's not a youthful gathering, because that's how it started out. As a bunch of kids who decided we're going to go downtown and hang out and have some fun.
I'm uninterested
and
in what
hijacked by, to use your phrase, a few bad folks. So how would you have described it if not
What
for a youthful
you,
gathering?
you could have said it that way, a gathering of young people that got hijacked by a few violent people. Instead, you said I'm quoting you, a gathering of young people turned violent.
I'm not sure I see a difference between the two.
Well, clearly, but again, you have no problem immediately pulling the race card on me because we're different. We have different ideas philosophically.
If that youthful crowd was mostly white people, would you have?
Yeah,
said the same
I
thing?
don't care. See, it's a great question you ask because it's so indicative of your mindset. And let me let you in on a little something, Greg, because I know you have no respect for this. But as a Christian, I can distinguish between a human being and a human doing. And what I'm interested in is human doings, white, black, brown, whatever. Don't care. That's why I don't use, and I didn't use, any reference to skin color. I'm interested in people causing mayhem and inflicting violence and robbing people and carjacking people in Chicago. I don't really care what their age is, their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, blah, 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 where they went to school. Do not care. But I do care about saying what is true, and you don't.
Good morning to you, too. Dan,
You call me a
we
racist.
both
You want me to
agree-
say good morning?
We both agree. Mr. Proft, that the kinds of activities that occurred in connection with that incident and by some of the people who were involved in that gathering were wrong and shouldn't be tolerated. And I think we both also agree that Mayor Lightfoot has not done enough, at least enough effectively, to try to deal with it. But I'm not the only person who thought that there were implications in the way you asked.
Well, of course you're not. Of course you're not. People who think like you are going to make
online.
people like you are.
Along with that
People like you are going to make the same
a bunch of
accusations.
people who
Right.
went immediately to race and started using racist tropes and dealt with it. I mean, come on. Let's deal with the underlying problem. The underlying problem is that kids have to have an outlet up to a point. They also have to follow the rules like everybody else. Nobody disputes that.
Mm-hmm. In 2014, you wrote this about Karen Lewis in her fights with Emmanuel. I find her too quick to reduce every dispute to racial terms. That's dangerous ground. And yet you had no problem doing that with me. And you have no problem with Lori Lightfoot doing that in the city either. Although actually you do sometimes have a problem with it. You wrote about Lori Lightfoot in June in the name of achieving not only desirable but absolutely critical racial equity in this often racist town. The mayor is mixing policy with politics in a way that divides instead of unifies. But you don't do that.
Again, I'll go back to what I asked you before. What were you attempting to convey when you said, well, they were a bunch of honor students?
I just answered the question.
Come on. I'm sorry?
I answered the question when you asked it the first time, using euphemistic language to mischaracterize what is happening, to play identitarian politics on a law and order issue that has nothing to do with race. It has to do with behavior.
I can't look inside your heart and tell you what's there, but I will. But damn it. I thought at the time, and I still do, that you were clearly trying to imply something. That if there were a bunch of white kids down there, you wouldn't have said it that way.
That's not true.
That's it. I mean, and you've known me for how long? 15 years? 10 years?
Quite a ways.
And so
2 years.
And so
Way back before Bruce Rauner.
And so for all of our interactions, your impression of me was that I was a racist, that my agenda is to treat white people differently and characterize white people differently than I characterize black people based on their skin
Again,
color.
you're using that word. I didn't use
I'm
that
asking. I'm asking
didn't
if
use
that's.
that. I can't look into your heart.
Well, I know, but
Only you can look into your heart.
right, but you can, as I'm doing, you can monitor people's behavior and commentary. We've had conversations, many over the years. And so what was your impression? That that's who I am, and that's who anybody is that disagrees with you, somebody that is a racist?
Dan, I don't do that. I don't do that lightly, but I thought there was an implication to what you said and how you said it. And I don't think if it were white kids, you would have said it the same way.
Well, I just want you to know that my sources told me that those kids were unruly, that it wasn't, somewhere hijacked by bad characters or bad actors. They were running around after, there was no plan in place, and they were running around trying to chase them out of the city, try to chase them back to the CTA. And they didn't only just beat up the bus driver, they stormed a North Face store, the Burberry store, a 15-year-old was shot, a 12-year-old was shot in the back. They were lighting off fireworks and shooting guns. So your sources are completely
Amy,
different than mine.
Let's go back to something I think we can agree on. One of the other points I made in that column was that the 15-year-old who beat up the bus driver was due in court the other day, the next day. He didn't show up, and there were no sanctions against that person's guardian or parent, even though they were released to the custody of their parents. I don't think that's right, and I don't think you don't think that's right. 15-year-old kids shouldn't be running around at midnight downtown unattended. Can you agree on that?
Oh, yeah. There's curfew laws.
Well, yes, because again, we're back to talking about behavior rather than your interpretations cast in a light least favorable to somebody you otherwise disagree with on a policy perspective. And by the way, you have a history of doing this. You characterize Bruce Rauner in a column as, I'll quote you, this is about his back and forth with the Sun-Times back in the day. This underlying story is not particularly relevant. The ongoing story certainly will give the Quinn camp an enormous platform to charge that Mr. Rauner is against not just poor people, but freedom of the press. I know you're going to say that, well, this is just you characterizing what the Quinn campaign would have the opportunity to do, but that's essentially your opinion. And I say this as not a particular fan of Bruce Rauner, as you know. Do you find that that's a fair way to characterize people? As on the one hand, you say to my face, you don't know what's in my heart, but you go on to your blog and you characterize what is in people's heart. Bruce Rauner doesn't like poor people. Dan Proft doesn't like black people.
I have not seen whatever it is you're reading from 10 years ago, Dan. You didn't talk about what the underlying exchange was about, but I will say that on its face, what that says is that I agree with it or disagree with it. It says that it creates a political issue that can be exploited. That's what it says.
Well, I
doesn't say correctly or incorrectly. It says it creates a political liability.
You
and as a general rule, President Trump notwithstanding, whenever you get into a big fight with local media, there's harm on both sides. The politician is harmed, and the media outlet is harmed. It's generally advisable in politics to avoid those kinds of things.
You mentioned, as I referenced, that Lori Lightfoot sometimes does a racial equity deal in a way that's divisive in a city that is very often racist. What's the source of the racism in Chicago? Where is it?
You want me to answer this in 30 seconds?
Give us a couple examples.
We as a city clearly haven't figured out how to live together. There are legitimate grievances on the black side. There are legitimate grievances on the white side. There are legitimate grievances on the Latino side. And sometimes they get pretty ugly. This remap fight at City Hall over the new wards is a classic example. It's all devolved down, not to community interest or whatever. It's devolved down to power politics where each group wants its own thing. We need to deal with the problems, and a sometimes racist approach towards policing is part of the problem. But we also need how to live together, and that requires mutual respect on all sides.
What do you think of the results from the $400 million Our City, Our Safety plan that was unveiled by Lightfoot a year ago? How's that going?
I think that the intention is good, but if the Sun-Times is correct, it hasn't had much of an impact. I don't think, Dan and Amy, that it's any coincidence that the highest levels of crime occur in poverty areas where you have broken families, where the kids don't have much hope, where the easiest way to make a buck isn't to take a job, but is to go out and peddle drugs. And I don't think that's any surprise. And in dealing with those problems, and in trying to get people of color kids from not killing each other, and the mayor's trying to deal with that. My problem with the mayor is that's only part of the solution. You also have to have a police presence while you deal with the underlying problem, and she hasn't been very good with the police presence.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to say more today. She's got a speech at 2:30 out on the west side where she's going to review the record of the last year, which is pretty bumpy. And we'll see if she comes up with something different.
Well, wonderful. I'm right. All she has to do is say racial equity a few times, and the Chicago Press Corps will dutifully recite that in their columns and their reports.
Part of it. My bottom line in the column you referenced at the top of your thing is pretty critical, Dan. It said that the city is teetering and she hasn't done her job.
Well,
The
she's
city-
making a
the-
big public safety announcement today at 2:30, but no questions from reporters.
Yeah, we'll see what she says. I would prefer she take questions too, Amy. I don't set the mayor's agenda. I don't work for her press office, but we'll see what she says.
And this racist city where people can't get along, and we have all these problems, and there's deprivation on the west and south sides, and obviously the streets.
Well,
have been
there is.
turned-
I mean,
well, I know there
that?
is. I know there is. I'm getting to my question.
Okay. So the question is how you deal with it.
Who's been in charge for 100 years?
For the most part, a bunch of Irish guys from Bridgeport, most of the time.
And those wards, how long have those wards been represented up by black and mainly black aldermen?
Bridgeport? No, not at all.
The west and south sides, the highest crime neighborhoods in the city, Greg.
Oh, 30, 40 years. I'm not. Listen, if you're
Right.
if you're saying that I'm letting the aldermanic class off the hook, I'm not. I mean, Chicago alderman is a rule, and this is a multiracial phenomenon. So they'd be more interested in going to the federal prison than doing their job.
Right. So all of the Democrats and Democrat socialists that have been in charge of the city for 100 years, in the mayor's office, in all the wards, white, black, or otherwise, you have a city that you're describing where racism exists, and yet you're mainly your focus of racism is trying to read, again, in a light least favorable to me or other people who are conservative, our comment on it, because that's the real source of racism. Trump voters or conservatives in Illinois politics, not the people who've actually been in charge, because as long as they recite the right lines, then you'll continue to run interference for them, which you dutifully do. I mean, it's sort of your classic, like, I'm going to vote for and I support the graduated state income tax, but Pritzker's not making it easy for me. This sort of pretend independence that you have when you characterize those people who are actually in charge, who actually have the responsibility for all the destruction that you're describing.
But Dan, I didn't say any of that. You're moving from A to Z and Omicron and everything else.
Well, no, I'm
What I wrote
I'm not talking about one column.
Incident. What I wrote was about one incident and how the mayor has dealt with the problem of crime in the city. That's all I wrote about it. I didn't go on to talk about Chicago history and long time history of racism and everything else. I wrote about one thing.
No, I know.
Have a larger conversation. We're going to need more time.
Well, I know you wrote about one thing, but we need to talk about the whole thing. And you've been around doing this for at least 3 decades. So you and all of your ideological fellow travelers who think, conservative reformers are racist, the proponents of things like school choice and the underwriters of charter schools who hate poor people, according to you, you think they're to blame for the destruction the city has
done. I said that people who favor charter schools are racist. In fact, Dan, if you go back and look at the record,
Bruce Rauner hates poor
I've been
people.
quite critical of the Chicago Teachers Union. They don't like to talk to me anymore because I repeatedly characterized them as greedy. Come on.
They won't talk to me either.
Greg Hinz.
All right, Amy, you have my sympathy.
We're up against the clock, unfortunately, but Greg, I do appreciate you coming on the show to have this exchange. Greg Hinz from Crain Chicago Business, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And show up at the press conferences. No one from print media shows up anymore. It's just the same old 3 people.
Why do you have to
asking all
show
the
up if you're
questions.
just going to cut and paste a press release?
Yeah, I guess so. All right, thanks so much for making us part of your morning, and what a fun morning it was. Thanks to Justin Kosick, who, by the way, Dan, today is his birthday.
Happy 11th birthday.
Thanks.
How old is he really? How
no,
old
he's
is he?
26, so now he's
Is
off
he
his
really?
parents' health care. It's a
Oh my
big
gosh.
day. He's all grown up in zits. Yeah, I got him a Mylar balloon on our behalf. So-
Just what every 26-year-old boy wants.
I know, right?
and a new skateboard. Woo! All right, and thanks to Quinn McCarthy. Now let's head into the newsroom. Mike, what did you get Justin for his 26th birthday?
I smile. I
There
got
you
him
go.
a smile. World-class smile. Carbon monoxide leak at an Evanston church leaves 6 hospitalized. We'll have an update on that story. WIND, Chicago News Time, 9.
COVID's rise has stocks falling again. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News, adding to last